like, make me fire lightning or something. Hi, Zizaran here with another Leaguestarter for Heist, and this is another Crackling Lance build, and this time it's Inquisitor. And I did see already on the Hierophant video that there was some people a little bit concerned about Archmage and Intensify. However, if we watch closely 17 seconds into the Crackling Lance video, you can play it in 0.25 speed, and you'll see that it's getting Intensify stacks with Spell Echo, which I would argue changes it quite a lot. This means that it might work with Unleash, which is why I'm very excited to try it. But do remember, I did say that the Archmage Inquisitor Hierophant thing is fairly experimental. This one is going to be less experimental. So this is probably a more conventional use of how a lot of people would agree that it should be built, and we will probably see a lot of people doing it on Assassin as well. For those of you on hardcore playing this, I've been considering playing this myself, but it is fairly squishy. We'll go through the build guide step by step here, but Endgame with Endgame gear and have around 6.5k life and 2k ES, which going up against bosses is going to be pretty spicy. That's not a big tank. And generally, yeah, the build does not look super tanky, but it looks like a lot of fun pew goodness with some nice juicy shatter crits for softcore or for pushing just nice levels in hardcore. So yeah, it sounds fun, should be really good, and let's get to it. So we can see as normal here that we have done the build step by step, so it should be fairly easy to follow. And we are leveling this as non-crit with Elemental Overload, especially as their first character in a league. Crit will be very hard, so we put that in here at change it around level 98 points. At 98 points, not level 98. And again, make sure that you do have the Path of Building community fork. That's what we're using. That's why it shows different colors and stuff. So if it's not loading, you probably just don't have the fork with the correct version. And we do have a video explaining everything a little bit more in detail if this is one of the first guides you've ever watched from me. And let's talk a little bit about the Ascendancies here. So from going down this path, you're getting Consecrated Ground, and the first one isn't that exciting. It's just mana regen, and that is nice actually early on. But yeah, Consecrated Ground, you create applies 10% increased damage taken to enemies. However, the second one is very cool because it has regenerates 200 energy shield per second while on Consecrated Ground. Now, early on, this is you're going to see your energy shields just whoop every time you take damage. And it makes them linger for 4 seconds. That means that even if you're no longer standing on Consecrated Ground, either from yourself or from Sulfur Flask or from Zealotry, then it will it'll stay for 4 extra seconds. And this gives us ailment immunity as well as attacking cast speed. Now, attacking speed is going to be very nice because we want to use shield charge to get fortify. Like I mentioned in the intro, the build doesn't have a crazy amount of defense. It is pretty squishy. Very tempted to do either of the Crackling Lance builds for hardcore. The problem is that it is a boss kill race, and they didn't nerf Essence Drain, which I wish they did, but here we are. And you see here at the end, we take Inevitable Judgment and Righteous Providence. Righteous Providence gives you better crit on the first time you hit something, and it gives you more crit multi on anything that does have an ailment. The Inevitable Judgment is particularly good against bosses. So for example, Cirrus, Shaper, anything like that. It can actually be a downside in some things because we do have access to so much elemental penetration now with things like Wave of Conviction, we have exposures, we have conductivity, and if you were able to get a monster to minus 70 lightning res, then this is actually a bad thing. Whereas yeah, for bosses, like for example Cirrus and stuff like that, you can see that they have 50, 50, or 40 for a standard boss in resist, and we're completely ignoring that as if it had 0. So and that's on critical strikes, so that is pretty nice. So there shouldn't be too many respecs while leveling. Even though we're around level 89 points, we are non-crit, but you can see that I'm already putting the points into crit here, just so you don't have to. We're pretty much at this point, you're just about to respec to crit. Especially on solo self-found, I would probably recommend that you take the Diamond Flask in Act 7. I think the most annoying experience I've ever had was playing a crit build in solo self-found and not having taken the Diamond Flask as a reward. So you can see that there is some small respec here at level 99 where you get rid of Elemental Overload. That is worth mentioning as well, because I've had some people that have, like, you know, they've invested into crit, they've definitely respec fully into crit, they have crit nodes, crit ascendancies, and they're like, Zizaran, I'm doing no damage, what's wrong with my build? And they've just forgotten to respec out of Elemental Overload. So I want to mention that in the video, so 1 month from now or 2 weeks from now, you don't come and tell, hey, I have no DPS, and you have Elemental Overload. We have 2 setups here. We have like early game setup. This is super trash. Everything pretty much is just life and resist. And I generally, if you're new to my build guides, I always try to show off all the builds with trash, because if it's good with complete trash and just blue items basically, then it's generally going to be a pretty solid build. So yeah, the leveling is pretty much the same as in the other one. You started with Freezing Pulse, Frostbomb, very standard like racing setup. Now, sadly, a Templar does not get Smoke Mine at level 10, so you're going to have to suffer with Flame Dash. A lot of people won't bother or care about that, but if you're used to going fast on a Witch or something, that can be a bit of a pain. Once you get the library quest done, you can get Smoke Mine there, and that's also when we can pick up Second Wind, and you can get then this setup: Smoke Mine, Flame Dash, Second Wind, and generally my Arcane Dash like level 3 or 4. Just you want to make sure that the cost of the Arcane Surge to proc is less than Flame Dash, so that every time you Flame Dash, you get Arcane Surge. Early on as well, you do want to use Wave of Conviction, Curse on Hit Conductivity with Fist of Lightning. Obviously, later on when we've gone crit and we have the Inevitable Judgment, that doesn't matter. But early on, you do want to penetrate the bosses and the monsters and things like that to help you with damage. And yeah, Orb of Storms, I think, is going to be pretty important for our single target damage as well. The way it works is Orb of Storms will like proc itself when you're casting lightning seals inside it. So if you throw Orb of Storms down and you stand inside it while wailing on a boss with lightning seals, then the Orb of Storms is going to keep triggering as well. So it's just a little bit extra single target damage there. And speaking of single target damage, we do have Sigil of Power, which is being added in Heist. Very excited to test that out, and we'll 100% be using it. It's not in POB yet, but I did want to make sure that I mention it. I would also recommend trying Unleash. Obviously, I don't even know if Unleash works with Intensify. In 3.11 currently, it doesn't, but neither does Spell Echo. So if it works, that could be really spicy, and I think it would be really cool boss damage. We have the endgame setup here as well. I have Arc, Intensify, Increased Critical Strikes, Spell Echo, Control Destruction, and added cold damage. So I want to explain this setup a little bit, because it might not be the most obvious thing. So first of all, let's talk about critical strikes and control destruction. So I actually do end up getting a lot of questions about this. And that's because control destruction says supported skills have 100% reduced critical strike chance. So Zizaran, doesn't that mean that you can't crit anymore? Why do you put this gem in? Well, that's not how it works. So in the same way that if you get a Fossilite Spirit Shield that says increased spell critical strike chance by 100%, you also don't crit all the time. So how does this work? Well, if we look at Crackling Lance, it has a critical strike chance of 6, Arc has a 5, and then whenever I use, for example, let's use both as examples. If I have Control Destruction with Arc, I lose 5% crit. If I have 90% without Control Destruction, I put in Control Destruction, I'll now have 85. If I have 91% with Crackling Lance and I pull in Control Destruction, then I'm going to have 85. That is why base crit is so strong, because when we're using, for example, in critical strikes, with Crackling Lance, this will put the base crit of the spell at almost 8. So I hope that was like a quick intro to how crit works and why we are using Control Destruction. And generally, even with Control Destruction, we can get up to like 80, 90, or even sometimes 100% crit chance. And let's talk a little bit about added cold, because if we remove this, it's not the #1 gem that it's suggesting. That would be, for example, Elemental Focus. Now, obviously on this, we are a lightning build and we are critting. So that means that we're going to shock our enemies, which is going to make them take more damage. So Elemental Focus, while it can be very high here, it's not always actually the best gem. Added lightning is 100% more damage than added cold. However, because we're critting and we're also using Herald of Ice, I'd most likely suggest using Herald of Ice and Ice Bite. Then that's really nice because we're going to be shattering enemies. The Herald of Ice explosion is going to proc, and you're going to be getting frenzy charges from those kills. So that's a really, really nice sustain of frenzy charges just for free, basically. Added cold is generally what I prefer there. You could also, like, I have suggested a cluster jewel, which you can see here. And what this does, as long as you're using Herald of Ice, they're going to be chilled, and then you'll be getting 10% lightning damage as extra cold damage against chilled enemies. So that's going to be a big chunk of cold damage that will help with chilling things. Now, do remember that Crackling Lance is a AoE skill too, so you might have the option of using Conk Effect. We don't know how good or bad, like, really big AoE versus really small AoE is going to feel. Especially, like, maybe you don't need that much AoE. Maybe we have too much. Maybe you really want to use Conk because it's a badass damage gem. So remember that for, and maybe faster casting will just feel amazing on top of all. Maybe like cast speed is the way to go, and as much as you can. So yeah, that's like a little bit there, but added cold is really nice. We have our movement skill set up, which is shield charge, faster attacks, and fortify. And generally, you do want to have flame dash endgame as well. The reason for that being, if you get to like a wall or something like that, flame dash can usually go through or over things, whereas shield charge will just be like slamming into that wall and not getting anywhere, and you have to walk around it. You can do Castle Now Taken, Tempest Shield, and you can also throw in like Enfeeble or Temporal Chains. Now, you do have the option of doing Castle Now Taken Immortal Coal or Steel Skin or something like that, but I'm a massive fan of doing Arcane Surge, Increased Duration, and Immortal Coal, and then having that as high as your strength will let you. You can see that we are currently without gear, basically. We are having some dexterity and strength issues. You do have like strength and dex nodes here available, but generally I would recommend trying to get like a Jade Amulet and maybe crafting dex on that to get as much as you can. But there's nothing wrong, especially early, with taking 1 or 2 dex nodes. Again, we see the Orb of Storm setup here. Orb of Storms, LA Focus, Crit Strikes, and Control Destruction. We don't really care about shocking or anything like that. Just a little bit extra single target to throw down on the boss. As for auras, you do have both the choices of Wrath and Zealotry. Wrath is slightly more damage. It's 6% more damage. And then Zealotry is 15% versus the 21 of Wrath. But you do get more of the Consecrated Ground. You get a little bit more crit. And with the way the ailment immunity is, you know, if you're moving a lot, then it's not always up, and it's a little bit extra uptime. Most of the time, especially with the linger, you will pretty much always have your ailment immunity up. For a lot of lightning builds, Impulse is recommended quite a lot. Now, I'm not a huge fan of that for crit builds. Obviously, crit is an easy way to get the explosion going. The thing is that with crit builds, you're not scaling the explosion itself a lot. Generally, with things that scale Impulse a lot, you'll see that they have a lot of, like, especially damage like this, percentage lightning, percentage damage, maybe sometimes spiritual aid, and also Pursuit of Faith can be good for scaling explosions like that, and elemental overload. But while this explosion, it can crit, that's generally only done on assassin, and it would also require Watcher's Eyes. And speaking of Watcher's Eyes, that is something that if you are able to get Watcher's Eyes, is definitely what would help decide whether I'm going Zealotry or Wrath, because I don't really feel super strong one way or the other. You can get Power Charge on a Shaper helmet would actually be quite nice, because I just realized while making this that there's not an amazing way to get Power Charges anymore. Obviously before we'd have Curse on Hit, Assassin's Mark, but I mean, yeah, Assassin's Mark is actually really, really good, and we should still have it in the build. The way this works now, it is now a mark. It's not a curse or a hex anymore, but it is going to be a significant single target boost. Shield and weapon, pretty straightforward. Obviously, getting high flat lightning, spell crit multi would be good as well, and just showing off some of the stats there. For your chest, getting a base crit spell chest would be nice. Other than that, just as much life as you can get. You can get percentage life, that'd be really, really nice. Soul Tether would also be a really nice belt. If you do get a Soul Tether, I would probably use that. Getting that portion of your life as energy shield and Energy Shield Overleach. Like, the way it works is it basically gives you Slayer Overleach, and that would be one of the things I would recommend at the end game in this build. For the cluster jewel things, Disorienting Display is an insane amount of defense because it's basically permanently up, and it's like an aura around you that'll just blind your enemies. And then the other ones, Snowstorm is really, really nice for this build. It's going to be a lot of extra damage. Overshock is just kind of whatever. Battle is pretty much the best life-based cluster jewel, but it's so hard to roll. You're never going to get it. I rolled it twice in Harvest. Excellent. Thanks, GGG, for making them so difficult. Towering Threat should be a pretty cool one, because obviously AoEs, I think AoE is going to feel really nice on this build. Bandit for this, you help Illyra. It's a crit build. So make sure that you don't kill all the bandits for this. You do actually help Illyra. Gives you resist early on, gives you crit multi, regen, all that good stuff. Pantheons is early on, you always go for like the crab Pantheon. It's so nice when you're very, very low on life. And I always do Rally Cash pretty much until I do Urban Lab, because it does help with the lab traps. And then later on, I quite like doing Solaris and Shakari, especially once you upgrade Shakari. That helps make sure that the poison mod on maps isn't as deadly as it can be. So as far as annoyance go, Diamond Skin is like a super cheap early one that you can do. And then another cheap one that's good. Prodigal Perfection will be a decent amount of spell damage. And then Endgame Heartseeker is a decent amount of crit, so you could definitely go for that. Let's go through the checklist and see what the problems are that we need to solve. Are there too many gems to equip? No, I feel like we're like pretty easy going on setups here. You shouldn't need any unset rings. And if for some reason you are struggling with gem setups, like the first thing I would drop would probably be the Orb of Storms, or the second, like the Castle Now is taken setup. So should be easy. Can the player have mana issues? So this isn't an Archmage build like the other one, but yeah, I would still say that like we don't have amazing ways of getting mana as spellcasters. Late game, you might find that you have enough mana just by like, you know, character mana regen, but we are recommending a mana flask for this build. And do like note that enduring eternal mana flask is generally the best way to go. Useful leveling uniques. For builds like this, everything like the barracks grip rings are very, very strong. The Darkness Enthroned with putting like some, you can put level 1 dual wielding hypnotic jewels with damage to pretty much any spell in there. They're really, really good. You know, your normal stuff like Tabula, Gold Rim. As far as wands go, never ever use Life Spray because that's only socketed gems, but you can get +1 to, for example, lightning gems, which is what I would recommend here. So as far as like defenses, quality of life and everything like that for this build, that is where it is lacking the most. Ideally, you want something like Soul Tether. If you can get the Timeless Jewel of Doriani, that really helps as well, because then you have a very big energy shield buffer. And obviously because of our Ascendancy, we are getting like a decent amount of regen, 200 energy shield per second, just for free from your Ascendancy is nothing to snort at. And once you start getting really, really high into energy shield, you could consider doing Cell's Oath as well, so that your life regen is applied to energy shield. But this is definitely not the tankiest character ever, and I'm not 100% sure how amazing it's going to be at like boss killing, like farming Awakener and things like that. But it should be an amazing and fun, really, really solid character to play and make a lot of currency with. But if you're going to be farming Uber Elder and Uber Awakener, this is probably not the best character. Feel free to like let me know, especially if you're a softcore player and you're like, you know what, I want to see how I do with it. Let me know, like, hey Ziz, I killed Awakener 8, it was great. So feel free to give feedback. As far as auras, like I said earlier, we do have the option between Wrath and Zealotry. The main thing that I care about there is, you know, if you have a Watcher's Eye. Other than that, Herald of Ice, really, really nice. And I don't think we can really fit anything else. You would then need like an Enlighten, and you would have barely any mana left over. So the biggest drawback to this build is probably just its tank. You don't really have like a crazy amount of, like you don't really have any block at all. You don't have any dodge. You're getting Fortify from Shield Charge, but there's not a crazy amount of sustain and mitigation here. I'm very curious to see how both this and the Hierophant ends up. Obviously, it's not always easy to predict things without having played them. I just hope we never have another explosive arrow. I know a lot of people didn't have the greatest time, and a lot of streamers also did explosive arrow as their starter and struggle with that too. I hope it brings you luck in Heist and that you have fun. And I hope you drop a lot of good stuff. So good luck in Heist. Try to die less than I do.